Hello, everyone. As you heard, I'm Anisa Lloja. I'm talking to you today from Tirana, Albania. And I'm very happy to be able to join today, although virtually, and to hear to my colleagues' presentation, both you and Andrew. It was very interesting to hear your work. And it was a good reminder of the experience we did last year, which the format was pretty much the same, meaning interesting. Today, I will be presenting the work I did for my dissertation under the supervision of Dr. Fuseki, and I must say that my participation in the program was sponsored by the Chevening Scholarship, which I'm grateful for. So as you heard, my research focused on Gjirokastra, which is a World Heritage Site in the south of Albania. And talking about what inspired us to do this, for me, it was love and the desire to understand better the situation. As currently, the local state party and UNESCO both have agreed to undertake a HUL, meaning historic urban landscape approach for the new integrated management plan. My research tried to understand and develop a feasibility study to understand if Gjirokastra is actually ready to adopt such approach. And in order to do so, I analyzed the local approach to heritage, the history of the legal framework of heritage protection in the country, and the current understanding and policies related to values and community engagement. So you can see in the image here, 1848 representation from British traveler Edward Lear of a part of town, which is kind of the same now, almost. But Gjirokastra actually dates back to the 4th century and has been a witness to many stages of history. The historic part of town is composed of castle. You can see a little bit in the image there. Many religious buildings and more than 500 dwellings, which we call HUL in Albanian. The city's built heritage has been under national protection since 1961, when it was declared a museum city, and we'll go back to that denomination in a while. While since 2005, it has been inscribed in the World Heritage List as a rare example of an architectural character typical to the Ottoman period. And I must make a clarification here, as in 2008, the city of Berat, again in Albania, was added to the same listing, but for the purpose of this research, I've separated the two in order to be able to include more city-specific stakeholders and perspectives. But despite the values, the city is currently facing a number of issues. On the one hand, it has one of the largest declines in number of inhabitants on a national scale. On the other, the historic part of town faces high numbers of abandoned houses and many legal interventions. And you can see some of the numbers here on the slide. So finding a balance between preserving the heritage of the city while offering its inhabitants good standard of living so they don't leave seems to be the issue. And it's interesting that since 1970s, this issue was framed as such by the researchers of the time. But while the issue seems to have remained the same, what has changed in the last 50 years is the approach towards urban conservation. When we discuss now about urban scale conservation, we think more holistically than what we did when the city was viewed as a museum, to be preserved as unchanged and intact. But the possible solution to this challenge, according to research, is the intersection between sustainable development and urban scale conservation. And this is what I tried to review during my literature review, meaning the intersection of whole approach and sustainable development. And through this work, I identified 6 main topics, which in a few words include the role of heritage in sustainable development, the evaluation indicators of different aspects, change as a concept, the adaptation to local legal framework, values, and community engagement. And these are the topics that were further researched by using Gjirokastra as a case study. My research work was based on both primary and secondary data. The primary data was gathered using semi-structured interviews with key stakeholders. And this is important because I couldn't, and in this case, I didn't interview local community, meaning the inhabitants. So this gives a specific background to my research. While the secondary data was collected through archival and bibliographical resources. The data gathered were then thematically analyzed using NVivo, following the grounded theory, which in a few words means identifying different themes present in the interviews, understanding how they are linked in between each other and the relationships they have, to build models, and then comparing these models to what I found in theoretical approaches and international best practices, as you can see a little bit structurally represented in the table here in the image. And this was the basis for identifying challenges and opportunities. And there were a number of limitations to my research, which I briefly listed here on the slide. So the findings were divided into 3 main subchapters. And in the image here, you can see the division for the codes of the primary data. And each subchapter contains the themes identified through the thematic analysis. So themes and code, you'll hear me probably overlap because codes refers to in vivo terminology and themes to the qualitative research. So initially, I've examined the legal framework and management structures, and this is for 2 reasons. A, because it's an implicit requirement of the HUL recommendation, and B, because research have found it is a crucial step for any heritage-related research in Albania. The image here shows a comparative timeline I've developed of the development of urban conservation between Europe and Albania. And the development here in Albania was one of the consequences of the socio-political situations in the country. In this context, it's important to consider, particularly for before the 90s, the influence of the different stances the country took in the international arena. And secondly, the importance cultural heritage had in the propaganda of the regime before the 90s. The 1961 designation can be considered in line with the international developments of the time internationally. But while internationally, this approach was later contested as one that aimed to freeze the historic centers, in Albania it became, and you'll see it remains, the guiding principle. And it's very much monument-based. And there are research that argues that this monument-based approach creates difficulties in assigning values on an urban scale. On an administrative level, it's the municipality that de jure manages the city, but the historic part is under close administration of the Ministry of Culture. And there is a lack of clarity between the roles of these institutions, and this is particularly important for the implementation of the HUL. Therefore, there must be steps taken to define these institutional positions. In the image here, you can see the map of the 2015 Council of Ministers decision to declare Gjirokastra Historic Center. It was one of the decisions, and this is the one that is still in place, although it cannot be fully applied as it's contests with the 2018 law on cultural heritage and museums. And the current law introduces the concepts of landscape. But as internationally this concept developed through time, in Albania it seems that it was just adopted from the international discourse. And it's not the result of a local academic discussion. Thus, it has not been fully understood nor incorporated in the ongoing practices, as you can see, it kind of clashes with the definition of a historic area. So in this context, in regard to the local framework and the management structures, I identified a number of problem areas, which include a clear lack of communication and division of roles between institutions, a lack of communication between legal documents, and a tension between heritage conservation and what is currently understood as development, to the extent that heritage seen, and I'm quoting here, an obstacle to development. So there is a clear conflict between an orthodox approach to heritage law and practice and the heterodox approach that must be taken to implement the whole. The second layer of analysis was done in relation to the site's perceived values. The results of the interviews reflected to a certain extent the values described in the legal documents, remaining largely fabric-based. The answers analysis resulted in 20 different themes, which were present in different degrees, as you can see visually represented in the word cloud. An important aspect that was present in many of the answers was the perception of Gjirokastra as a whole, although all the answers left out the larger urban context, the national environment, as the whole approach would indicate. Moreover, in most of the interviews, change was seen as a threat to the authentic Ottoman time city, not as a component of the landscape that must be protected. And there are current local discussions on the value of Gjirokastra, including on those that are critical to the World Heritage List inscription. In the view of these researchers, the inscription criteria are descriptive and fabric-based, and some go even further, suggesting the revision should be done to the OUV to include the layers of development of the city through time and to incorporate the principles of HUL. The local approach to valorizing heritage is still very much an essential one, considering heritage conservation as a legitimate goal per se. And this approach further isolates the historic areas of the city from the context, and it further divides the professionals from other local stakeholders, thus conflicting with the very base of the whole approach, which lies in community-based values. And this was the third and last layer of my analysis, the community engagement. Although community participation was a key component of the application folder for Gjirokastra for the World Heritage Site list, the current levels of stakeholder engagement in the city are seen as not satisfactory, although the legal framework has been updated to include participation, at least on paper. Causes for this low citizen engagement are many, and they do not remain only in the heritage sector. Because as the built environment was well preserved for the last 60 years, we cannot say the same for the social fabric. The interviewees speak of a poor level of knowledge and awareness among the inhabitants, and we should remember the inhabitants itself have not been asked, while the NGOs and local institutions throw the ball of blame to each other for what has not been achieved yet. In the view of the interviewees, the importance of civic engagement in the case of Gjirokastra stand between their citizens' rights and their responsibilities. To them, an aspect that needs to be tackled through awareness raising is the shifting of perception of many locals from heritage as a burden to heritage as a resource. And in fact, research has shown that the economic function of heritage is not only important for the economic sustainability, which would be helpful for the city, but also because it supports societies in appreciating heritage. And this would give us a better situation, heritage-wise. In conclusion, we can say that Gjirokastra reflects the consequences of a now outdated approach to heritage, with a historic center that it's largely abandoned and deteriorated, with increased investments in initiatives that target tourism only, with conflicting interests of developers and a high number of immigration. While both historic urban landscape and sustainable development are undoubtedly the approaches to undertake to solve the current issues, a deeper understanding of the local context should inform better steps and more tailored tools, thus resulting in more sustainable solutions. My findings indicate that the first step to be undertaken is a local debate. New tools must be developed to host this debate, allowing for more diverse narratives to be incorporated. It should include the values of the heritage, the concepts that should be used to work with it, and a clear division of the roles and responsibilities among local institutions and UNESCO. The results of this discussion then should be reflected in the local legal framework. While the development of the integrated management plan is in process, now it is an appropriate moment to reflect such findings in a set of practical steps. In a broader perspective, the study emphasizes the need for further research regarding the concept of change. Lastly, this research addresses a need that has been identified for cities implementing the whole approach worldwide. While the whole emphasizes the need for local adaptation, it is also true that this task falls on the shoulders of the local parties, which in often cases, like the one in Albania, have not undergone a process of developing concepts, assessing the local context, and defining the vision for the future. Thus, more work should go towards understanding the local context and how to properly adapt the steps and the tools of HUL to those. Thank you.